Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Whether you're listening on YouTube or on podcast form, I want to thank you so much for listening, and also give a massive thank you to Ed Boyer for coming on for a follow-up interview. If you were not familiar with Ed or have not seen the first interview, he is an incredibly talented person and been involved in quite a few things, whether it be Pentatonix, The Sing Off, Glee, Pitch Perfect, Peter Holland's voice play, and Home Free. You've done a lot of things, including that and many more. Thank you so much for being available to come back on the channel for a follow-up interview, man.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so I just watched the behind the scenes. I mean, my original email that I sent that, or this new email that I sent talking about this follow-up interview. I just recently watched the behind the scenes of the making of Evergreen with Pentatonix. I love watching behind the scenes videos because it's just as an artist myself, I feel like there's such an opportunity to learn in those things. Just seeing how they do all the different things, and it's like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. Would have never thought to do that, or just seeing how artists work, I think, is really cool. And I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to hear the people that were involved and their process on and their involvement? So, can you give a little bit of for people that aren't familiar, a little bit of backstory on you, but also can you give your involvement in this Evergreen album?
Sure. So I saw the same video, and it was funny because I'm here on the other coast doing the mixing, so a lot of the stuff in that video was new to me as well because I just wasn't over there. But that's sort of been my relationship with them. We did work when they were on the Sing Off and I worked on the Sing Off. We were in the same place at the same time, so we worked physically together a few times then. But since then, I've run into him a few times, but when we're working, it's always been remotely. So on email and over Zoom and text messages and things, which is just, kind of how the world is now. But it's interesting to have a relationship like that. That's lasted a decade,
Yeah.
So that's when I met them and got to know them. And we've been working since then. Was that your whole question?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
I feel like I forgot a part.
It's all good. Thank you for that. But also, now, can you talk a little bit about your involvement in this new album?
Sure. So I basically I mixed it. I mixed all but one track, and did the vocal editing and tuning and all those kind of cleanup things as well. For most of them, I had my guy Ted, who helps me out with that, also did a few of them. And like I said, I was working remotely. One funny thing about this album is that the previous few projects, we were all at home, so they were doing DIY rigs with their own mic, just in their bedroom, or with some foam up or whatever. And I was mixing here in my room, which nice full range speakers and subs and everything's tuned and all that stuff. And then for this album, they were so eager to get back into the studio that they really went and, booked a lot of time at a great studio with great engineers and great mics and all this stuff. But I was on vacation that week. So I actually mixed the album on my MacBook with headphones plugged straight into my MacBook.
Stop it.
So we did the complete reversal of who was doing high end and who was doing DIY stuff for this album.
That's actually so fascinating to hear, just because the more and more interviews that I have and speak to people, I realize more and more it breaks down this mold of, obviously you have the gear that you to do all this great stuff, but you don't always need all the gear. It's so much more in your experience and your talent as an artist yourself, than it is in the gear that you hold. Because so often, artists starting off are like, oh, I need to buy this and get this plugin and get this thing, and I need to soundproof my studio, and I need to make sure that everything is perfectly the way it needs to be. But it's really all about just practice and practicing your craft, and you could make it's mind-blowing actually to hear that, because it sounds so good, but it was mixed on your MacBook Pro or MacBook whatever, without all your fancy tech in your studio. It's amazing.
Well, I think it shows both sides of it, because on one hand, it shows you like, well, it is doable. On the other hand, it's not till you get used to having some things and then you don't have them anymore that you realize how much you appreciate them and enjoy them. The biggest thing I noticed was that working in my own studio here is comfortable. And, when you have your own place and you work in it for a long time, it's the little things, like you get your ergonomics worked out, like your desk is the right height, your chair is the right height, your speakers are right at your ear level, everything's comfortable. And then you get to, I was literally in a hotel room on vacation, and it's like, oh, my desk is 3 inches too low, and at the end of a long day, then my wrist hurts, and like this chair is not comfortable, and like little things like that make you appreciate your own situation.
Yeah. Was there any tech that you missed or gear that you missed from your studio that you wish you could have had while you were mixing remotely?
Well, when I mix here, I'm completely inside the box. Partially because the way I came up was learning in the box, and learning in my 20s when we're moving around all the time. So having like a studio wasn't really ever an option. So I really came up and inside the box. And one aspect of that is I never want to be someplace and not be able to print a mix. Like the idea of like recalling a console to me is so what would I do if I had to like recall an analog console every time I needed to print a mix, especially with like if the nature of your work is like mine, where you're doing several projects every single day, and you never know who's going to call out of the blue and say, oh, can you print the one thing without a lead vocal or whatever? And you're like, well, if you had to recall it, it would take a long time. But if it's just on your laptop, no matter where you are, even if you didn't have headphones, you could just bring it up, mute the vocal, and send it back. So I've sort of been stubbornly in the box. And so really, when I'm not here, the thing I miss most is my monitoring system and being able to listen down to 30 hertz knowing it's flat. Whereas when you're on headphones, there's always some guesswork, and there's it's like, well, I can hear the bass, but I can't feel the bass. I don't know what the bass feels like. And I will say the revision process went long enough that by the very end of it, I was back in my room. So I did get a couple passes of the album, hearing it here, and there would be things that was like, oh, like I couldn't tell this in my headphones, but like there's some 125 hertz. It's just too much, the entire song. Maybe mastering would nab it, but I'm glad I got it here. So it's both sides of it. At the same time, it's like, oh, I could still mix an album from a laptop and a chair the way I could when I was, 26 or whatever.
No, I love that. That's fantastic. And just a brief overview for people that aren't familiar: in the box, as opposed to out of the box. Out of the box is all this outboard gear, like all the rack mounts and everything. In the box is working essentially on your computer with all the digital stuff. That's super interesting. So I'm curious, if you had a guess, how many typical hours would you have said you put into something like this? To mixing the album? Yeah, let's say this album. Yeah.
It's pretty different from song to song, especially because on this album the arrangements were pretty different. Something like the song Evergreen, where it's pretty much 3 vocals and a guitar. There's not a lot of prep work to get it to be in final shape, especially because that's not a song where they want it to sound tuned like a pop song. They want it to sound somewhat organic, and they're singing it closely. So the tuning process is just like, well, let me take a pass. And if there's something that's like off in this direction or that direction, I'll give it a little nudge or whatever. But even with the timing, you want some flam on a song like that. So there wasn't like vocal line or really like nudging things 5 cents here and there. It was like leaving it alone, balancing it, picking out the reverb you like, automating and stuff. So something like that was, maybe 2 or 3 hours till mix one.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas something like Over the River, where you have, you have all the strings and you have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of vocal layers, and more sort of sound effecty type things. That takes a lot more, editing work to get it to where you feel like you can mix it, and then mix work. So that might take 3 or 4 times as long from top to bottom as something like Evergreen. So it's pretty song dependent.
Sure. Do you have to put on a different quote unquote hat when you're mixing, say, Pentatonix or an a cappella group that typically leans a cappella when you introduce an instrument, like say the guitar or the strings? Or do you kind of mix with that same kind of hat that you would if they were still doing like a cappella, straight a cappella?
So with the top voices, it's more about the genre of music they're doing. With the bottom voices, that's where it gets really, really different. But if you're doing something and there's an actual kick drum in it, you're not gonna do the same thing to the beatbox as you would if the beatbox were dominating that space. So it does get pretty different. Although I will say, most of the time when they're adding instruments, they're adding mid-range instruments. Like it's usually cello, it's usually guitar, and a lot of times Matt is singing below that instrument. So again, it's really song specific and case dependent.
Yeah. Is there any song in particular that you're especially proud of on this album? Stands out to you?
Oh, jeez. That's such a loaded question.
I hear that.
And another weird thing as a mixer and an engineer in general is there's the final product, and then there's your inside knowledge of what it started as and how it finished. And sometimes as an engineer, you're most proud of the ones where it started one way and ended a different way because of what you did, even though that's meaningless to an outside ear. So there's every now and then there's a song where you think, you know what, that song wasn't working, and then I did this thing and then it was working, and you're really proud of that. But you can't be like, oh, you know what, this song sucked until I did X, Y, and Z. So there are probably songs or moments that I'm more proud of, but not like things you really want to talk about.
Well, I was debating the clickbait title of this if I was going to go in that direction. I was going to say maybe go along the lines of the guy that makes Pentatonix sound good, and play along I'll explain in a second. I'll explain the intro, because obviously they're incredibly talented and everything like that, so they sound great on their own. But there's that music industry phrase or joke essentially that no matter how good, or the band is only as, or the group is only as good as their mix engineer, whether it be the front of house mix engineer or in the studio, because you could have a tremendously talented band, but if it's a bad mix, they're not going to sound good regardless. So you really you play a lot more of a role than people actually really realize, I think. So I want to give you the credit that you deserve.
I think the two sides of that are, as an engineer, sometimes you open a session and you think, okay, this is unmixed, but this is good. This is good music.
Sure. Yes.
And it not that it doesn't matter what I do, but like, this is going to be good. Mm-hmm. And I'd almost have to go out of my way to make it not good. And there's sometimes you get a session and you open it up and you think, I can make this less bad, but there's nothing I could do to make this good. Sure. And this isn't working with this group specifically, but like in general, any group, any project, so much of it is just inherent in the music. That said, there are some times where it's like, this wasn't clicking, and then you did something and then it was clicking. So you think, okay, maybe I got it. Maybe I got it over the hump, and did something like that, or I didn't mess it up. But, I definitely, one thing that's fun for me to do is, re-listen to music that I really liked when I was young. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
music I haven't heard since I was 14 or 10 or whatever. Now that I've had, now that I have a room and I have developed ears to put it on, and sometimes I think, oh my God, this song I liked has the most amazing mix. And sometimes you think this song I loved has a terrible
Very true.
mix by technical standards, but I loved it. So either the mix didn't matter, or there's something about the mix that quote unquote not good but worked about the music. So it's pretty telling to go back and listen and hear music the way you didn't hear it, even though you heard the song 200 times. It's also a reminder that so much of what you do either doesn't matter or can get in the way. If you're getting in the way, you'll think, well, why did I like this song? And you think, well, the melody's amazing and the drums are amazing and everything else kind of didn't matter, but that's what I liked. Must have been what I liked about it then. So it's a reminder to step back and try to listen to things as though a lot of those things didn't matter to you and you were just somebody who wanted the direct injection of the music.
Yeah. No, it's super fascinating, man. So I want to be respectful of your time. I have one final question for you. People are one of the more intricate songs of the album was the one with the I Saw Three Ships. There was a lot of stuff going on. Can you talk just a little bit about that process with, I mean, even in the recording of it, they showed all the different, percussive things that they were doing. And so I just actually, this is a personal question for myself. I'm curious, were they miking in like those, I could have sworn I saw like metal, like tins and stuff like that. Were they miking the tins for reverb, or was that just happenstance that they were placed there?
Geez, I'd have to look at,
like I could have sworn they put like mics and it looked like they were mics like placed in boxes or like in like these metal tins that you go like apple bobbing in or whatever the case is. Like I don't know. And I was curious I was like, are they trying to get a reverb sound out of that?
They might have, or they might have just been miking it to get like the resonance of it. I'd have to look. I mean, one thing about this album, I mentioned that my process was on the box. But when they recorded it, it was very, very analog. Like, so even though I'm in the box, by the time everything got to me, it was, C12s and U67s through Neves and then through an SSL and their outboard compressors. So it's not like the album as a whole was in the box. Like there was a lot going on from the engineering side that made my life easier. And I don't know exactly, like if they sent me a stem of like, oh, here's this cool percussive sound we got, sometimes that would be 5 or 6 sounds summed there and sent to me. So I don't, so I would have to, I don't want to watch the video again and see what you're saying. And also remember like what the heck was even going on. Cause this was months ago.
Sure. Of course.
This was 200 songs ago, so I'm trying to like. I do remember on that one they had some like percussion that they were making with their with the cello bow and stuff that I don't think made the video. And there was also a lot of experimenting with stuff that like let's try this, and then it doesn't make it in the final mix. So. Yeah. To avoid misspeaking, I would want to look at that.
Sure, absolutely,
and make sure I'm not making something up before I
absolutely
commented.
Well, in wrapping it up, I want to thank you very much for taking the time. Is there anything that you personally, in your involvement in this, want the audience to know about this album that you find special or anything like that?
I mean, I think the main thing about this album is there are so many intangible things about every album that you don't know unless you were part of it. And sometimes it makes its way into the music. Sometimes it doesn't make its way into the music. Sometimes what's wrong with an album is that there needed to be intangible things in the music that just weren't there. And what was nice about this album was that they were back together in one place. And I think that did affect how they made music, and it made its way into the music in a way that changes how it sounds. And that was nice. And it was nice to, as somebody who wasn't there with them, I was still getting the files and listening to them and thinking like, oh, this sounds different because they were there together in the place making music. In a way that I think all of us everyone who makes music has this hole from the last couple of years where you think, I wish I could just get in the room with somebody and hash this out, and you can't do it. So that was sort of a relief and a nice thing that I think worked its way into the album.
Yeah, absolutely. I very much agree with that. Well, Ed, I want to thank you so much, and I want to thank everybody for listening. Definitely go check out the Evergreen album, and also go check out all the other work that Ed has his hands in. He's has his hands definitely full. So thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great day. God bless and peace out.